Hi everybody. So in this video, we're going to look at two skills that are going to be important, almost certainly important for our exams that are coming up quite soon. So the first one we're going to look at is dividing, but not just dividing, but also making sure that we know what to do with any remainders. In other words, we need to express our answer as decimals and not remainders. So we've got a question on the screen. 830 divided by 3, and I've already set it up in the bust-up method, and we should be very familiar with the bust-up method, and that's taught very early on, so you should have done that in year 3 and year 4. But what you may not be used to is the idea of arriving at decimals. So how do we do this? Okay, so we get our number 3 and we ask ourselves, how many times does it go into the first digit? So how many times does it go into 8? And of course the answer is 2, 3, 6. So we put 2 above the 8. But because we landed on 6, we've got a remainder of 2, haven't we? And that remainder needs to go in front of the next number. So this becomes 23. Okay, so how many times does 3 go into our next number? 23. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21. It goes 7 times, and we landed at 21, which means we've got a remainder of 2. So let's stick the 2 in front of the next digit, which is 0, and that number becomes 20. So how many times does 3 go into our next number? 20. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. It goes 6 times. And we've got a remainder of 2. Now we're out of numbers. So this remainder 2, I'm going to write it here, R2, remainder 2. We don't want to express our answer using remainders. So what are we going to do with that remainder 2? What we need to do is we need to write decimal point at the top here, decimal point at the bottom here, and we're going to put the number 2 underneath the bus stop. But this time we're going to add a placeholder of 0. Okay, so we now need to do exactly what we were doing. How many times does 3 go into our next number? 20. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. It goes 6 times. We landed on 18 though, so we've got another remainder of 2. I'm going to do the same thing as I did last time. My remainder is going to go underneath the bus stop, 2. I'm going to add my placeholder, and now my new number 20. I've got to do the same thing again. How many times does 3 go into 20? And of course, we've just answered that question. 3 goes into 20 6 times. Now, you probably worked out by now that this answer is just going to keep going on and on and on. So we can stop here. Our answer is going to be 276.666, so on. Okay, so that's the first one. I'm going to show you one more time how we do this. Okay, so we've got 611 divided by 5. So once again, I've set it out using the bus stop method. And once again, I've got to start with this digit 5 and see how many times it goes into our first digit 6. So 5 obviously goes in 6 just once, doesn't it? So I'm going to write number 1, but we've got a 1 remainder. So that's going to go in front of my next number. How many times does 5 go into 11? 5, 10, it goes twice. And of course, we've got the remainder of 1. Let's stick that in front of that number. How many times does 5 go into 11? We just did that. 5, 10, it goes twice. And I've got my remainder of 1. So I do decimal point, and my remainder, remember, it goes underneath the bus stop. But this time, I'm going to add a placeholder. How many times does 5 go into 10? 5, 10. It goes in twice with no remainders. So I can stop there. I have to stop there. There's no other numbers to work with. So my answer is 122.2. Okay, so if you didn't understand that, what I recommend is just watching again and try to figure out which part it is that you do not understand, and just keep watching and keep trying until it clicks. When you think you're very confident, we are going to give these questions a go. So we've got 4 questions on the screen. So if you don't mind, pause the screen here and answer those 4 questions. I can't really see my camera, but I expect that it might be hiding the top right question. It might not be, but if it is, the top right hand question is 932. Oops, change the color of the font. 932 divided by 4. So if you give those questions a go, so make sure you pause it because I'm about to switch on to our next activity. So give those a go. And remember, if you don't understand it, make sure we rewatch the questions that I've already answered, okay? Right, let's move on to the next activity. Okay, so the next activity all involves word problems. So these word problems are going to require us to use the method that we've just used. It's going to require us to divide, sometimes into decimals. So all that's really changed here is instead of being given a straightforward mathematical statement question, we have a word problem and we need to work out what the question is asking us. Okay, so if you need to pause on the screen and answer this question, do so now before I move on. Here's another question. Remember to pause and answer this question. Here's another question. Remember to pause and answer this question. Okay, now we are moving on to our final topic of this video, and that's inferences. Now, I've said quite a few times that being able to make good inferences is going to be very important for our reading comprehension exam. Okay, we need to be able to make inferences. So remember, inferences is all about looking at a text and finding clues to answer questions. So sometimes you might be asked a question and the answer might not actually be explicit, clear in that text. Instead, we have to use clues to answer the question. Okay, so here we have a text, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the text to you, but feel free, once I've finished reading it, to pause and read again if you need to. So I do apologize if my camera is, let's see if I can stop my camera for this section. I do apologize if this doesn't work. Hopefully it does. Hopefully I should have disappeared. So I'm going to read this text to you. John loosened up his tie and wiped the sweat from his head. Swiveling in his chair, he reached behind him and edged the window open to allow a breeze to enter. He returned to the test in front of him and looked determinedly at the question. "Why can't I remember how to do this?" he muttered to himself, using his sleeve to mop up the remaining beads which rolled down his cheeks. John looked around at his peers, who all seemed cool and calm. He noticed his best friend, Oliver, draw his attention, scribble something down on a piece of paper before screwing it up, dropping it onto the floor in front of his foot, and kicking it in John's direction. The paper arrived safely at John's feet. Pretending to tie his shoelaces, John ducked under the table before inconspicuously grabbing the paper from the floor. Coming from under the table, John returned to sit comfortably and unscrew the paper. He stared at what was written, smiled slightly before gazing back at Oliver and then once again at his work. John's smile grew. Suddenly, John's paper grew dark as if being hidden by a lurking shadow. An adult shadow. John looked up from his desk to see his teacher with raised eyebrows and his hands on his hips. Okay, right, so feel free to pause and have another read of that if you need to. But what we're going to do now is we're going to look at those phrases, those sentences that have been highlighted in different colors. Okay, so I'm going to read them all individually. Let me hide my camera again. So we've got John loosened up his tie and wiped the sweat from his head, using his sleeve to mop up the remaining beads which rolled down his cheeks, pretending to tie his shoelaces. He stared at what was written, smiled slightly before gazing back at Oliver and then once again at his work. Suddenly, John's paper grew dark as if being hidden by a lurking shadow, an adult shadow. John looked to see his teacher with raised eyebrows and his hands on his hips. So what we need to do here is we need to pause the video and look at each highlighted section one at a time and see if you can work out what's going on. Can you make an inference? Can you read the highlighted section and think what else might be being said that isn't being explicitly said? So I'm going to do the first one to show you what I mean. So the first highlighted section says, John loosened up his tie and wiped the sweat from his head. So I need to make inferences based on that section. Okay, so if he's loosening up his tie and wiping the sweat from his head, what I imagine John is feeling is some sort of heat. okay? When we're hot, we sweat. And when we're hot, maybe we loosen up our tie to give ourselves some breathing room in our shirt. But what is it that might be causing him to become hot? Could it be just that it's a hot day? Maybe. Or could it be that he's feeling nervous? Because when we feel nervous, sometimes our heart races and our body temperature goes up. So there's all sorts of inferences I can make with that sentence. Now, because I have the whole context of the story, because I know it involves a character called John, who's feeling a little bit nervous whilst doing an exam, to me, it sounds like this red section really kind of points at the fact that he's kind of feeling nervous, his heart might be racing a little bit, and that's what's causing him to become a little bit flustered and a little bit hot. So can you do the same thing? Can you look at each highlighted section and just either write it down on some paper or say it aloud to yourself, or maybe tell someone next to you, what is it that you think that the writer is trying to say? Is there anything hidden within that text? Is it anything that isn't explicitly being said that the author might be trying to get across? So feel free to pause the screen and have a look at those highlighted sections. But most importantly, make sure that you come up with some inference for each highlighted section, okay? Okay, so we'll leave it there, and I will be sending you another video with another 2 topics that are going to be important for your exam. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.